I would just love it if you could introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about yourself and where do you fit into this Flathead Valley community?
My name's Dave Fern. I've lived in Whitefish. Well, we've lived in Whitefish since 1988. Uh, I own a small business. I spent 24 years as a trustee on the school board here in Whitefish. I'm finishing up my 8th year in the Montana House of Representatives, House District 5, the Whitefish area. Uh, I had to make a decision, uh, and I asked myself, uh, do I dislike this process of the legislature enough not to pursue the Senate seat? And, there are some strong likes and dislikes of the process, but mainly I think the relationships have been real positive. There's some great folks there. And there are times we act like we're in middle school, but that's a minority of the time. So I decided to seek the Senate seat. As listeners and readers may know, and I'm asked about this all the time, we went through the redistricting process. People are really interested in how that works. And, after the census, we then see the redistricting commission appointed, and they go through a statewide tour with maps, take a lot of input. Some of it is based on population changes. Some of it's based a little bit on politics, so seeing what party can get forward, get through the new lines that might help them, which is understandable. And that's why you have a 5-person commission with a 5th person kind of neutral sometimes making the tie-breaking vote. So, okay, so that was new districts were put together. Whitefish was split, as you might know, along Baker, and we have a new Senate district, and it was at least competitive for a Democrat. And so I thought, with my relationships to the legislature and a collaborative spirit, I would seek the seat. And so that's where I'm at right now.
Kind of bouncing off of what you just said, you have like obviously served multiple years in the legislature. You've seen a lot go down and you've had a long time to kind of think through these policies, and I'm going to ask you more about those task force and stuff in a minute.
Sure.
But what more do you want to accomplish? Why should citizens send you back to the legislature for this Senate go around?
Well, I think that you alluded to the task force and perhaps the commission I'm serving on behavioral health. So just isolating those two issues, uh, they are going to result in quite a few bills that we'll see in the next session about how to implement the recommendations. So I would think first and foremost, um, I'm interested in assuring that we can bring forward some of these recommendations for property tax reform and assuring that Montanans with developmental disabilities or behavioral health maladies have much improved services. So that in itself will entail a lot of work. Um, I think the other issues that I think come to the top are looking at housing issues. Uh, I worked and had pieces of House Bill 819 uh, that I think we can use as a starting point to improve the housing inventory. And believe it or not, even getting into a little bit more of affordable housing, which appears to be sort of an oxymoron, but we've got to get some prices down for essential workers or we just don't have them. And I think finally, there's some new emerging ideas on public education funding that came out of the recent interim committee meeting. And, there are some substantial shortfalls brought forward with COVID and the high inflation rate. And the statutes we currently have really weren't built for high inflation. So uh, we're looking at some ideas, or they are looking at some ideas to bring forward to the session that would help relieve some of the stress on K-12 districts throughout the state. So I think those are some of the issues that I hope to address and be active with.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned education. I know that you've spent a lot of time in that kind of sphere. And so tell me a little bit about what those shortfalls that you've seen um, couple, over the past couple of decades in the education realm that you think could be addressed by the legislature.
Well, looking at the financial model of it, we education, like a lot of government in itself, uh, is a people business. And so I can recall, when I was on a negotiating team several times looking at, what we could propose to our staff. Um, you start off with an obligation of so much just to keep up with the salary schedule that is, in this case, a negotiated item on a contract. So before you even start thinking about additions, you probably have close to 2.5%, looking at paying for more for retaining your folks. Then you add the complexity of special needs that have occurred, over they've always been there, but they seem to be at a higher percentage and more intense and require more recent resources that come up with potential answers to help a child and a family. So I think that one move we made as legislature is we now have special education funding as part of the formula that basically when we come in, we can settle that special ed funding along with what's called the A and B, the average number belonging funding for students in those first few weeks. However, the problem, and generally it's not a problem, is we're usually giving, for example, 3% new budget authority to the district, which is a combination of state funding and local funding. And what has occurred, as I mentioned, is that when you have high inflation, it's very difficult to keep up. The second part of it is just the funding formula in itself is that, in the 1980s, the courts looked at adequacy and equity of schools. And first, they looked at equity, saying, there are the haves and the have-nots as far as taxable value in the state of Montana. How are we going to deal with that? And so an equity formula was put together. And it does not say all school districts will be funded the same. It basically gives you a 20% range where you have a base budget, you have a maximum budget, and you have to fall between that. And what is occurring with the property tax issue, especially, is it's become more and more difficult to pass levies that fund that last 20% of your budget. So I've said to many people, as part of looking at reforming the funding for schools, I think we also have to tackle the issue of property taxes. The two work together. But it's, again, it's a story of low taxable values in districts that have more difficulty. And we can just look down at Kalispell, where the folks in Kalispell in the city had a choice, a good choice of spending money on public safety for more police officers and firefighters, or schools. But perhaps there wasn't enough capacity for folks to look at both, which would be a major sacrifice as far as expenditure and property tax impact. So that's some of the problems we have that we probably have to get a better handle on.
I know that you spoke a little bit about property tax, but I want to hear some of I know that you can we could talk about this separately for hours, but what are some things that you've learned on that Behavioral Health Commission, and what are some ideas that you have for legislation you might be able to bring forward to address that?
One very fundamental thing I learned is that we are so tied to Medicaid, and that I know some folks will feel uncomfortable with this, especially as you look at the relationship to the federal government, debt, all that sort of thing. But the need to have a strong Medicaid system, be it traditional Medicaid or Medicaid expansion, which we'll be looking at whether we want to reauthorize that or not this session, which is another issue. But it was all very helpful at looking at the services, and in this case, the services for behavioral health needs. I mean, I'll bring two issues that you wouldn't think of, which brought it to light to me on the issue of behavioral health and developmental disability services. Let's talk about transportation. And so you think about Montana, it's urban, but it's also a large area is what we call frontier, very rural. And I think a lot of us just think, oh, transportation, we've got a couple vehicles, we can get around. But a lot of people who also have disabilities also have transportation issues. They don't have a running vehicle. And so we looked at a model of providing assistance for transportation, vouchers, and that type of thing. We actually looked at South Dakota, which has a really good system of doing that. So we're not trying to necessarily reinvent things. We're looking at states that model this really well. It's very interesting to observe that all states do something well. Some actually do a lot of things well. And we looked at models, from across the United States. The other issue I would go back to is housing. We have some ideas on, for example, transitioning and providing specialists who can help folks make the move from institutions to housing. And, we had testimony of folks basically just getting dumped off after leaving an institution. And guess what happens? They're back at the institution, or their problems are reoccurring because housing is such an important element of this. So one of the things that I'm most proud of with the commission is on a near-term initiative, meaning money we can spend right away. We have 40 million of that. We are funding a Section 8 housing study. So, and that sounds kind of dry, but if you don't keep up with rents based on documentation, you start losing ground on the subsidy you receive from HUD, the federal government. And so you start losing Section 8 housing. Section 8 housing is really important for low-income people. It's maybe doubly important for people with disabilities, where you're trying to find affordable rents when folks have very low or no incomes. So those are some of the issues you wouldn't think directly about behavioral health, but they really opened my eyes to how wide the needs are for folks who have disabilities in the state.
And then you mentioned a while ago the importance of workforce housing, especially in places like Whitefish, or where the communities are really reliant on that workforce, but there's a lack of affordable housing to house the workforce. And so I guess just kind of what are some thoughts you have to address that? I know that that's something that's important to a lot of people in
Right.
the Valley. So
First, I would say uh, to you and to people who are interested in this subject, Google the Montana Housing Task Force 2024. They've met for two interim periods, and so it's a 100-page document, but it's not as long as it seems. There are graphs and things, there are pages, but it's super interesting. It has a lot of recommendations all over the map, and we use some of those recommendations putting together bills last sessions. But I've written down just a few, the variety of issues they're trying to tackle. Minimum lot sizes, more money to the Montana Housing Fund, low income tax credits. Is architectural review too pervasive, and is it slowing down the process? Even things like looking at the heights of buildings, and should there be so much restrictive zoning on that to prohibit multifamily housing? Now, I'm not advocating one or another. I'm just saying it's bringing forth ideas that we need to think about. We have to think out of the box. And so that's really good to look at that document. I think they've done a really good job. And we will see bills on those topics moving forward. But the problem is that it's called deed restricted housing. And for apartments, we're seeing a business model that seems to work now, where if you have enough density, and you're provided some concessions from your city or your county, meaning looking at parking spaces, setbacks, density. Um, a developer is able to uh, uh, use deed restricted rents within the marketplace. So, for example, you may have 30% deed restricted versus market. And I'll just quickly explain deed restricted. Just give you a quick example. You're looking to attract folks between 60 and 100% average median income. Your rent can't be more than 30% of your income. And the developer has struck a relationship or contractual relationship with an authority such as a housing authority to provide the oversight. And so there's no real subsidy needed for that. If there's enough volume and there's enough market demand, the two can kind of work together. And I think that's a step forward. We'll see a couple of developments happening in Whitefish that will perhaps ease some of the renting problems. As far as building homes go, it's a lot harder. Uh, just to give you an example of kind of thinking out of the box, in Columbia Falls, there'll be a small development where the city owns the land near utilities. Habitat for Humanity will be involved in the building, and the Flathead Land Trust will be owning the land underneath. So you have the combination of third parties working together. And the key thing is to lower the price of building, and then it becomes deed restricted. In the case of a home or a townhouse, it means that the equity you can build up as an owner is really limited. So you're kind of having a trade-off. Say you've rented for 20 years, you're tired of it, but you can't get into a house. This would be an example of how you could get in, but you want to sell that house 10 years down the road. For example, perhaps you can only make 3% per year. So it keeps it in the affordable category or portfolio. So that's a product that's available. We need more of it. And that product is not for everyone, but it is an option. So I really am an advocate for many different solutions that might remedy some of the problems we have.
And then the last kind of question, or I have two more questions that I wrote out, but first, do you think that it is the legislature's job to monitor the judiciary? Do you think that obviously I think going into this next session, that's going to be a big topic among conversation. And yeah, just wanted to hear your thoughts on kind of how you think the legislature is best suited to go about that.
Well, from my perspective, I'm less concerned about the judiciary than some others are. And I guess if you look at the root problem for folks who are concerned, I would think it goes back to our state constitution. And so judiciary is looking at, how to properly interpret our state constitution. And there are folks, rightfully or wrongfully, who have disagreements with some of the text in our Constitution and what some of the conclusions are. So I think as far as review goes, within an interim committee, for example, such as Law and Justice, I think it's appropriate to have a deep understanding of how the process works, what legislative reforms might be necessary. I think that fits into the purview of the legislature. But personally, I feel reasonably good about the judiciary in general. Have you noticed who votes for the judiciary? It's the people. You're voting for your district judges, you're voting for your Supreme Court. And, people are pretty aware of the politics involved and can dig pretty deep, pretty easily into decisions and recommendations from various advocacy groups. So I guess I would say it's not one of my top concerns or priorities going into the legislature.
I know that you've been in the area for a while, so I'm sure that a lot of people know you personally, and when they see your name on that ballot, they're gonna think of you in a personal way. But For those that you don't know, or for those that might be unfamiliar or new to the area, what do you want the community to think about when they see your name on that ballot in November? What do you want kind of their takeaway to be?
I'd like them to think of me as just a regular person, uh, pretty hardworking, small business owner, involved with a lot of physical work. So in some respect, I can relate to the rancher ag community and saying sometimes I'm out in very cold weather, being uncomfortable, and thus sitting in a warm body amongst a warm body in the legislature in Helena doesn't quite seem so bad after you've done that kind of work. Uh, we've raised 3 kids in the area who are adults now on their own. And so we also know the stresses of raising kids and the financial challenges and difficulties there that have been there all the time, but as we've discussed, seem to be at a heightened level right now. So I think I can relate pretty well to the rank and file person out there. And I think that's important. Also, I think my years on the school board, I've had a pretty collaborative nature and try to balance the needs of, for example, in that case, the school districts, looking at the needs of students and parents, looking at the ultimate goal of high student achievement and making sure our kids know where they want to go and are confident as they leave high school into the big world wherever they wish to be. So I think I'm a pretty moderate politician, and people are kind of jaded and cynical that the moderates kind of don't exist anymore. Um, I guess I want to assure uh, folks listening or reading that, moderation is pretty alive and well, but it just gets sort of stamped out to some degree uh, by a lot of shrieking on the edges. And it also gets stamped out a bit by a lot of the national issues that we seem to get obsessed with. Um, I think Montana generally works pretty well. As we've talked about, we have some major issues to major challenges, but we do get along pretty well. We do have a balanced budget. We have pretty good oversight, pretty good understanding. So those are things that are important values to me in representing this district and potentially an expanded district for me. And that's what I would like people to know about me.
Well, awesome. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you think is kind of essential to your campaign or to this upcoming session or anything?
I think we've done a pretty good job. I would remind people on the property tax issue that, um, I probably rarely come across an issue with a potential solution from our task force on property taxes that has been so popular. Uh, and I think folks feel they have certain grievances while they appreciate what visitation tourism has done for us. They also understand that it provides some inconveniences and some stress. And the thought of seeing, in a sense, a transfer of taxes from those who might have more to help really the struggling middle class here and some of the expenses they have has been an extremely salient point among folks. So, uh, I just can't stress enough I mean, it's a real issue. It's a symbolic issue as far as fairness goes. So, uh, I'm going to keep pushing that issue as best I can. And I think people should know that as we move forward.
The Behavioral Health Commission is in their first interim, right?
Yes, the Behavioral Health Commission is still ongoing. As a
Uh,
matter of fact, on September 30th, we will present our recommendations to the governor.
oh, okay, cool.
Why do we do that is because written in House Bill 872, which authorizes the commission and the potential $300 million of expenditures, is a relationship between some oversight committees within the legislature, especially on finance, and then the governor. And so it's a little bit back and forth with the governor. And I say that in this case in a good way so far. With the first $40 million that we could spend on near-term initiatives to date, they've all been approved. But we have, basically it's kind of a check and balance system. So we're going to be presenting big recommendations for the long term that he and his office will review. And we've had someone from his office on our commission, and then we'll get feedback. And then maybe we'll make some changes where appropriate. So we have basically consensus moving forward on this. So and there's a sector of it we really haven't even dealt with yet, and that looks at some dollars set aside for facilities that we really haven't had the time yet to look at, but we will. So it will be ongoing in a sense based on the election with me or without me. I mean, I think this will go on for quite a while.
Well, awesome. I think that that's really everything that I needed to chat about. In the meantime, thank you so much. I really
Oh yeah,
appreciate your time and your insights, like always. So,
very good. I'll see you down the road.
yes, sounds good. You have a great rest of your week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.